All right, welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. One of the things that we love to do on this show is really peel back the layers on professions that most people just have like a surface level understanding of. They might know the job title, maybe what the dictionary definition is, but they don't really know like what it takes to be successful in that role.
Yeah.
So today we are doing a deep dive into the world of protocol officers. And we're going to do that through the lens of actual interview questions that are being used right now to hire these folks. These are the questions that separate the really great candidates from everybody else.
I think this is a really smart way to do it, actually,
hmm
because what you get by looking at the questions and then especially at the sample answers that, someone who wants to get hired would give, you start to understand, okay, this is what the employers are really looking for. These are the core competencies, maybe even beyond the basic stuff that's listed on the job description, that are absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. And so today, like I said, we are looking specifically at the world of protocol officers. Our mission today is to provide a clear and insightful understanding of what it takes to thrive in this role.
Okay?
So whether you're thinking about becoming a protocol officer, or maybe you work in a related field, or maybe you're just curious about the ins and outs of managing, all these detailed and high-level procedures, stick with us. This deep dive is for you.
Right.
So I think a good place to start would be with like the actual nuts and bolts of protocols, right? Like how do you do it? So one question that often comes up in these interviews is, what's your experience in developing, negotiating, and implementing protocols?
Yeah, I like that they start right there because they want to know, look, have you ever done this before? Not, do you know about it? Have you read a book about it? Have you taken a course in college? Have you actually done it? And the sample answer that we have here is pretty amazing, actually. The candidate says that they managed the development and negotiation of over 50 protocols during their time as a research analyst.
Yeah, 50.
That's amazing. I mean, to me, that shows so much experience, and it shows the level of like immersion that this person has been a part of.
Right.
And what's really interesting to me is not just the sheer number, right, but the implied responsibility here, right? We're talking about making sure that things are in compliance with industry standards and international agreements.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about like, the protocol for refilling the coffee machine in the break room.
Right.
This is serious stuff.
Yeah. When you're dealing with protocols at this level, there's a lot at stake. It's about making sure everything aligns with very specific and very detailed and complex frameworks, right?
Yeah.
And it has to be done right. There's no cutting corners.
Yeah, you can't half-ass it. It just seems so meticulous.
Yeah, I think that's a really good word for it. And, what this says to the listener, to me, is that, look, if you're thinking about going into this kind of role, understand that this level of thoroughness is expected, right? You're going to have that kind of attention to detail and be able to work within those kinds of frameworks. I mean, think about the kinds of things that might be on a protocol officer's plate. You might be having to ensure that a process, say a research project, is compliant with, the World Health Organization's international health regulations, but at the same time also in line with the very specific national guidelines of, say, I don't know, France or something.
Right. You're dealing with different sets of rules, and you have to make sure that everybody's like on the same page and everything is correct. And I think, you brought up a great point there. When you talk about like international regulations, you're also, dipping your toes in the world of international protocol. And so another question that interviewers often ask is, what challenges have you faced when managing international protocol?
Right.
And it seems obvious that we're talking about more than just language differences, right? Yeah. And I think the sample answer we have here really kind of gets at the heart of it. The candidate says, the biggest challenge is understanding the cultural nuances and expectations of different countries. And it's not just that, right? It's how you navigate those differences.
Yeah.
And they say specifically that the way they do this is by maintaining open communication and researching the specific policies and regulations of the countries involved.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got this like really important focus on communication, right? Like you can't just assume that everybody understands, what you mean or what's considered appropriate. You have to be really intentional about building relationships and understanding different perspectives.
I think that's a key point.
And then, on the other hand, you've got this like really, really serious research component.
Yeah.
Like you have to be a student of the world, constantly learning and adapting to new information.
Right. And I think for the listener, this really highlights how much of a balancing act this
Yeah.
role is. You've got to be this really strong communicator, able to bridge those potential cultural divides, but at the same time, you've got to have that intellectual rigor, that commitment to, really understanding the formal and informal rules that govern, interactions in different international settings. It's a really unique combination.
It really is. One example that comes to mind is, if you were coordinating a multinational conference. Like, think about all the things that you would need to be aware of, right? Like seating arrangements based on hierarchy, gift-giving customs, like it just goes on and on.
Right.
And all of that is part of protocol. So, we've talked about developing protocols, we've talked about the international aspects of it. Now let's talk about like the day-to-day management. How do you actually juggle all these different protocols that are probably flying around at any given time?
Yeah,
Interviewers want to know, how do you prioritize protocol tasks? Right. And I think, it's got to be more than just like a first come, first served system.
definitely.
Right.
I need a strategy.
Yeah.
And the example answer we have here is they prioritize based on urgency and relevance, which, makes sense, right? You got to deal with the things that are most pressing and also the things that have the biggest impact on what you're trying to accomplish. But then they take it a step further.
Really? What did they say?
Yeah, they say they also focus on the tasks that have the shortest completion time, but offer the greatest potential for success. I think that's brilliant because what it does is it allows you to build momentum. You're knocking out those quick wins, which keeps everyone motivated, and it also allows you to demonstrate tangible results.
It makes you look good. Okay.
Exactly. It's about being effective, not just busy, right?
Yeah.
And one thing I really appreciate about this answer is that they also mention the importance of getting feedback from the team and other stakeholders when you're prioritizing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. Because prioritizing isn't something you do in a vacuum. You have to understand the needs and the dependencies
Yeah.
of all the different people who are involved.
Hmm.
And so, again, for the listener, this shows that to be really successful, you need both that really clear sense of the objectives, but also the flexibility to adapt based on, the input that you're getting from different sources.
Okay, so we're starting to build a pretty comprehensive picture of what this job looks like. And I think it's clear that, the world of international affairs, it's constantly changing.
Always.
You've got new agreements being signed, you've got norms that are shifting, regulations being updated. So staying up to date, staying current is absolutely vital in this kind of role.
Right.
So interviewers will often ask, how do you stay up to date on international protocol developments? I mean, you can't afford to be working with outdated information, right?
No. And the sample answer here kind of lays out a really proactive strategy for doing that. They talk about reading all the relevant publications, actively participating in conferences and seminars, and engaging with organizations that, are the ones who are actually shaping those global protocol standards. It shows they're committed to continuous learning. They're not just going to sit back and, hope that someone sends them an email update or something.
Yeah, you got to be out there. You got to be engaged. And they also mention, which is, in today's world so important, is leveraging technology to monitor news and global trends, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much information out there and you have to be able to kind of sift through it and find what's relevant.
And I think what's really insightful about this answer is that it's not just about formal learning, right? It's not just about, sitting in a classroom reading a textbook. It's also about staying attuned to what's actually happening out in the world in real time.
Right.
And so what this says to the listeners, look, to be really successful in this role, you need both. You need a strong foundation in those, established principles. But you also need that ability to stay ahead of the curve in a very, very dynamic and constantly evolving environment.
Right. Like think about how quickly international travel regulations can change, right?
Exactly.
What's true today might be completely different tomorrow. So you have to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
And that, I think, leads us to another really important aspect of this role, which is, even with the most robust protocols in place, things are going to happen. You're going to have unexpected situations, sensitive situations. You're going to have to be able to handle those with grace and effectiveness.
Absolutely.
So interviewers often ask, how do you handle difficult or sensitive situations while managing protocols?
Right. It's a loaded question, but it's an important one. And the sample answer really nails it. They talk about the importance of, first and foremost, remaining calm and professional, even when things are getting a little heated or, there's tension in the room. And then they emphasize the need to really understand the perspectives of everybody involved.
Right, just
You know,
wants to say that.
you can't just come in and say, well, this is the rule and that's that.
Right.
You've got to be able to see things from the other person's point of view, especially when you're dealing with those different cultural norms or, conflicting interests.
And I think that ability to really empathize, to see things from someone else's perspective, that's got to be so valuable, especially in this role where you're constantly dealing with people from different backgrounds, different countries.
Absolutely. And they go on to say that, you have to be able to draw on your knowledge and your past experience to assess risks and develop strategies. That's huge, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just about following a set of rules. It's
Mhm.
about knowing when to bend them, when to, maybe propose a creative solution. It's about having that judgment that comes with experience. And I think this shows the listener that, to be a truly effective protocol officer, you need more than just technical expertise. You
Yeah.
need that emotional intelligence. You need those problem-solving skills
Mm.
to really navigate those tough situations.
Yeah, imagine, for example, you're having to mediate a disagreement between representatives from two countries that have a history of conflict,
Yeah, tough.
Like, there's so much history there, there's so much baggage. That's a very, very real challenge.
It is.
So, we talked about a lot of really important stuff. And, I think it's clear that protocol officers need a really diverse skill set. But I want to talk about one more thing before we wrap up, and that is efficiency. I mean, no organization wants to have these cumbersome or outdated processes, and they're looking for people who can come in and make things run more smoothly. So the last interview question that we'll talk about today is, what are some strategies you've implemented to optimize protocol processes?
Okay. And I like that they specifically ask about what you've implemented, not just what you think could be done. They want to know that you've actually done it before. And the example answer we have here, it's full of really concrete strategies. They talk about things like, streamlining communication channels, using technology to automate certain tasks where that's appropriate, providing really clear training and resources to the people who are involved in implementing the protocols, stuff that can really make a difference.
Yeah, and what I especially like about this answer is that it emphasizes collaboration between departments. We often think of protocol as like this, I don't know, maybe like a solitary bureaucratic kind of function.
Yeah.
But in reality, it involves so many different
Oh, yeah.
teams. And so having that clear communication, that coordination is crucial.
Right. And what all of these optimization strategies really get at is that there's a real focus on both speed and quality.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's not just about doing things faster.
Right.
It's about doing them better with fewer mistakes. And I think that's something that the listener should really take to heart.
Yeah.
If you want to be successful as a protocol officer, you're not just a rule follower. You're a problem solver. You're always looking for ways to improve those processes to make sure that things are running smoothly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We started by talking about the actual development of protocols. Then we went into the complexities of international protocol. And then we really dug into the day-to-day management of those protocols. So let's bring it all together. What are the big takeaways here? What are the core competencies that someone needs to be a really successful protocol officer?
All right, well, from looking at all these interview questions and the types of answers that really get you hired, it's clear that this is a role that requires a pretty amazing, comprehensive skill set,
Yeah.
right? You need that practical, hands-on experience in every stage of that protocol life cycle, from the initial development all the way to implementation.
Right.
You have to be a really great communicator, especially when you're navigating all those, complexities of international interactions. That cultural intelligence is so important.
Absolutely.
You've got to be able to prioritize like a champ, decide what's important, what can wait, all in a very fast-paced environment. You got to be committed to learning constantly because things are changing so rapidly. You can't just, rest on what you learned 5 years ago. And then, of course, you got to be able to handle those sensitive situations with, professionalism and grace.
Right. Keep a cool head.
Exactly. And always be looking for ways to improve, to make those processes more efficient and effective. So it's really a lot more than just, being really good at following rules.
Right. It's about thinking strategically, understanding different cultures, and being able to communicate clearly and effectively, often in very high-pressure situations.
Absolutely.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive for me. I hope it's been helpful for our listeners to get a sense of what this role really entails.
I think so, too.
It's clear that it's much more than just, knowing the rules.
Right.
It's about all those other qualities that we talked about. And it actually makes me wonder, What other professions out there that maybe seem totally unrelated actually share some of these same core requirements for success?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Right. Like, what about a surgeon, for example?
Oh, yeah.
They obviously have to have incredible technical skills,
Right.
but they also have to be able to think on their feet, make quick decisions under pressure, communicate effectively with their team, and the stakes are incredibly high. Or what about someone who's managing a really complex logistical operation, like, getting supplies to a disaster zone or coordinating a huge international sporting event?
I love that.
Right.
I think you're really onto something there.
It seems like there's this common thread that runs through all these different fields where you need that blend of meticulous attention to detail and the ability to adapt and problem solve in real time.
That's a really interesting thing to think about.
It is, and it's something that, we can all maybe reflect on regardless of what field we're in. Like, what are the hidden connections between seemingly unrelated professions? And what can we learn from each other?
Great question to leave our listeners with.
I think so.
So,
So that's it for our deep dive on protocol officers. Until next time, keep diving.
keep diving.